one sec. So,
What's that?
I was just looking at this rock. A little bit closer, this thing's probably there might be more copper over the hill. Anyway, this is the Bluebell mine in Mayer, Arizona. It's a historic mine that produced from 1901 till 1926. It was a early kind of copper mine, one that predates many of the large open pit copper mines that you see in the state today, most of which are in the southern part of the state in the Tucson and Safford and Morenci areas and up near Baghdad. These deposits, they're older rocks. They're about 1.7 billion years old, and when they started mining these deposits around the turn of the century, they didn't have a very clear grasp on what they were doing. They mined what they could find at surface and chased down what they thought was a vein until it disappeared. And in 1926, copper prices dropped, and it was due to Henry Ford shutting his assembly line down in Detroit. He was switching from producing the Model T to the Model M, and that shutdown lasted 6 months. And the magneto coils that were used to generate electricity from the internal combustion engine in the Model T were made of copper. And the alloy bearing metal called Babbitt metal was about 7% copper. And so that was enough to drop the price of copper from about 14 cents to 13 cents, and Bluebell shut down. Back then you had copper producers in the Great Lakes region in Michigan, up in the Keweenaw Peninsula, and shipping costs and underground mining was just too expensive to keep it open. So Bluebell was shut down and never reopened. It's a fantastic property. It's a great mineral resource during its mine life. We'll talk a little bit about the mining engineering. The miners here used a method called stoping. And stoping, if you follow me, look at the wall here. Now this wall comes from recent quarrying the last couple of decades, but what it did do is show us a fantastic showing of the main ore chute. And you can see from the striations and the lines in the rock that it appears to be near vertical. Now what are we looking at? We're looking at beds of rock that were preferentially replaced by metal sulfide, and this mine was a copper mine predominantly. It had an average cutoff grade of 3% copper over its mine life. When you're looking at, so the method of mining was called stoping. So what the old miners would do is they would drop a shaft underneath the ore zone, and then they would tunnel underneath the ore zone until they were directly underneath the ore chute. And stoping refers to mining upwards. So when you're dropping a shaft, it's called wincing. And when you're mining upwards, it's called stoping. And they were drilling holes with pneumatic drills and hand drills and setting charges of dynamite and blasting the rock so that the rock would fall down an ore chute. You ever seen those wooden structures in adits before where there's a stope? They would concentrate the blasted rock into an ore cart, and they would haul it out with horses or mules, usually mules, and then they would wince it to the surface. And that's how they mined underground, is you had to use gravity to do the work for you, and you were working upwards, so you were actually mining up, and every time you blasted, that ore would come down, and you'd start working your way up the ore chute. And so that's where those terms come from. So I know this is just the surface of a boulder that came off this main ore chute here at Bluebell, but we're talking grades of copper that are in excess of 1%. If you take a little bit closer look, you'll see the green mineral here is a mineral called malachite, and it's a mineral that's made out of copper and carbon and oxygen and water. In fact, there's water in the structure of the crystal. And Chrysocolla is created in this environment when a copper-bearing mineral called chalcopyrite, which is, you can think of it as pyrite but with copper in it, is exposed to rainwater. Erosion exposes the ore zone over millions of years, and rain in an oxygen-rich atmosphere rusts the ore, just like your car would rust if it was left out in the rain, right? So, you know, refined metal rusts, but so do minerals in the natural environment. And what this tells us is that this copper ore is of a soft quality. It's called an oxide copper ore, and that means that you don't have to mill it and you don't have to smelt it. You can put it through a jaw crusher after you blast it, and you can put it into a heap and you can leach it in a pond. Depending on what you want to get out of it, if it's copper, there's one method. If there's gold and silver, it's another. But if you want to get copper out of it, you use a sulfuric acid solution in a big leach pond. I'm sure you've seen those in the Tucson area. You ever go hike Mount Wrightson and you look out towards Cerrito and you see those big, what look like lakes of teal water? Those are sulfuric acid leaching ponds. And what they're doing is they're putting that blasted rock, and they're saving tons of money, millions of dollars, and it could be electrowind. And what electrowinning is essentially running a current through the pregnant copper leach solution that's been saturated in copper from the ore sitting in it for a few days to a few months. And if you run an electric current through it and drop a metal plate down into it, you can plate copper sheets, 99.99% pure copper cathodes, and you can ship it directly to market. So we've got high grade soft copper ore, oxide copper, at surface here at Bluebell, exposed magnificently due to previous quarry operation. And the great irony of this is that whoever was working here selling this rock as painter's rock or whatever they called it, probably selling it criminally underpriced by their own ignorance. So this rock could be anywhere from $200 to $300 in copper, gold, and silver. And there was a fellow here that was selling it for $10 to $20 a ton as gravel and dimension stone. So, but blood red, figured, oh, might as well start dropping the shaft and assay it, see what it comes back as. And you hope that vein gets a little bit wider, that ore chute gets a little bit wider as you go down. But 6 months of work and all your savings, your life savings, you know, it was a gamble for guys back then. A lot of these prospectors after the Civil War, they were veterans, and some of these guys were real hardened from that experience, and they headed west to seek their fortune, and most didn't. But the Bluebell mine is an example of a bygone era, but a spectacular example of high-grade copper ore here in Arizona, the Copper State. And I'll finish it off with just going over some of the numbers here. Like I said before, they mine just over 1 million tons at an average grade of 3% copper. I want to say produced around 3/4 of an ounce average grade silvers, about 25 grams per ton, and about 1.5 grams gold per ton, which compared to today's numbers is really outstanding. You don't really see that anymore, especially that group of elements, copper, gold, and silver together in that higher grade. So the ore chute here is about 40 meters wide, and channel samples about 10 years ago were taken by an Australian company, and they were doing exploration here, did some drilling, and they came back with 1.2% copper in the wall here, and 12.5 grams silver and 0.5 gram gold. So that's what's left, and you know, what I'm thinking is this is a viable exploration target. It's a great piece of history, but it's an economic resource for Arizonans that could benefit the community. Patrick Wood, and I own the lease to the Soto mine. I'm the president and CEO of Helvetia Minerals, a junior exploration company based in Phoenix, Arizona. And what we specialize are volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits, commonly referred to as VMS. These types of deposits occur throughout central and western Arizona, and were some of the early copper mines that were developed in the late 19th century into the early 20th century, kind of leading into the Depression era. On the hillside above me, you can see kind of a green copper oxide hue, and you can see some waste piles up there. The Soto mine operated, I want to say, from around the 1880s to 2 years into the Depression, so it closed its doors for good in 1931 when copper prices dropped from 18 to 5 cents almost overnight. This shut the copper industry down for quite a few years. Just previously we had visited Bluebell Mine, and one thing I'd like to note is that these high-grade copper zinc mines that contain appreciable amounts of gold and silver, these two mines in fact line up along a north 60 east trend, and they're separated by just over 4 miles as the crow flies. So they were once connected when they were active fumarolic vents on the ancient ocean floor about 2 billion years ago. And essentially what these deposits are volcanic vents that are spewing metal sulfide minerals into the ocean floor about 2 miles deep. And what happens is, kind of like a jet contrail where superheated gas coming out of a jet engine condenses into liquid droplets forming condensation, thus contrails. These fumaroles that are essentially volcanic vents off-gassing on the ocean floor are kind of similar in the sense that you have superheated volatile liquids and gases that are coming out of these vents and interacting with the cold, dense ocean water that's saline, and simultaneously the change in environment, the pressure, the temperature, the chemistry of the environment that these fluids are experiencing as they're mixing with seawater causes the metal constituents that are dissolved in these hot fluids to precipitate solid minerals. And so when you look at these black smokers on the ocean floor, they appear to be like chimneys with soot and black smoke just spewing out of it, much like you'd see chimneys, you know, in an old, in a small town where people still use wood stoves for heating. It's not smoke, it's just metal. Copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver, bonded with iron, bonded with sulfur. And these vents, they form chimneys that can be as high as 30 meters. And that's over 100 feet. It's pretty impressive, and only the strangest life forms can exist there. And so you have quite a wild geologic history here in Arizona, here in central Arizona, that's different from what you see in the northern part of the state, especially different from what you see in the southern part of the state. You know, a lot of those mines that are being mined today by large companies like Freeport-McMoRan and Sarco, for example. You know, these are large, low-grade, large open pits, and we're talking, you know, 100, 200-year mines. Back when these were being mined in the early 20th century, there was no understanding of geologic model. We had no understanding of where these deposits came from. And so I can look at these deposits today and I can tell you, yes, we know they're VMS deposits. But back then, the old timers, they had no idea. And so you have to keep in mind that when these were operating, they were underground. Mine fires were quite common, and underground mine collapses were common enough to kill miners on a fairly regular basis. And so a big reason why these mines like Soto and Bluebell were abandoned around the 1920s, 1930s was a combination of economic cycles. You had a recession in 1926, and then you had the Great Depression in 29 to 39, and then you had World War II, and these are precious metals mines, and gold mining was banned. In fact, DeSoto a request to reopen DeSoto during World War II went all the way to the Arizona State Supreme Court, and it was denied because of its gold contents. And so after a recession post-World War II and a big copper rush in the southern part of the state in the Tucson area in the early 50s, these deposits were forgotten and lost to time. And they still contain quite a bit of metal in them. They're very small, they're high grade, meaning that per ton of rock that is mined, the percentage of copper is an order of magnitude higher than what you typically see on average being mined today commercially. So a commercial grade of copper at a mine like Sarita or Baghdad, these are Freeport mines, maybe 0.2% copper. Here at DeSoto had an average production grade of 3.75% copper, meaning that a lot of that copper that you see up there in the waste dump, it could be anywhere from 0.2 to 3.6% copper. We're talking a really high grade deposit here that was relatively unmined, relatively untouched. DeSoto only produced 300,000 tons of ore over, I want to say 50 years of mining on and off. And in order to get the ore down, where we're sitting is an offloading bay for an aerial tramway. So you had buckets, kind of like a ski lift or a gondola, coming up and down that was driven by gravity, controlled by a series of brakes, pulleys and levers. And you would send a load down of ore, a ton of ore, and that weight, as it was coming down the mountain, would drive the rest of the empty buckets that had been offloaded onto vehicles headed for the railway. They would go up the mountain, and so it was all powered by gravity. And I think that was just ingenious. It could produce upwards of 500 tons per day on average, and so it was logistically challenging for the time, but the old timers, they made it happen. So we came back here as a company, me and my team, to evaluate its economic potential and its viability for producing copper, gold, silver, and maybe even zinc.